I've known I wanted to be a writer since I was 7, and I think that part of that was around 7 is when I really began reading, and I really began enjoying writing. So once I began reading and realized that you could escape into a story, I thought, wow, I want to do this. Not only do I want to continue to do this as a reader, but I want to do it as a writer. I want to tell stories. And I was always getting into trouble for telling stories, so I figured this was another way to do it that was legit. When I was growing up in Bushwick, it was an underserved community. It was a neighborhood that was at the beginning of white flight, so there were a couple of German families, but it was predominantly Black and Latino. So I grew up speaking Spanish and English. I grew up, you know, eating collard greens and arroz con pollo, and, you know, I just grew up in this whole, like, mixture of cultures. Part of the reason I began writing, when I started writing Last Summer with Mason, I wanted to put Bushwick, which was the neighborhood I grew up in, on the page, because I had never read a book where there were single-parent families. I had not read a book where, you know, the whole neighborhood was a neighborhood of people of color. It was always the person of color moves in, but it's not the person of color telling the story. And so I wanted to give voice to the people who had been historically silent. There's so many different worlds inside this one small world that's Brooklyn, and there's so many different cultures, and I don't know anywhere else in the country where you can get this kind of mixture going on. And I feel like for me, in terms of being a writer, I almost don't have to leave Brooklyn to tell stories because everything is happening here. So much energy to it. I love the fact that if ever I was awake again at 2 a.m. and actually wanting to go out, there was some place I could go. There's always a conversation going on. You can always walk down the street and stop and talk to your neighbors. So in that way, it almost feels Southern, whereas people say hello to you and you don't know them, and you say hi back and you strike up a conversation, or you don't. But I think it's a great place. I think I'll be here for a while. So when I was writing Locomotion, in one of the parts, I actually based Lily in Park Slope and Lonnie, Locomotion, in Bushwick. And so the buses he takes in the book, he takes the 52 bus, which goes across Gates Avenue, and then he takes the 69 bus, which comes up Vanderbilt, and then on Prospect Park West. And he gets off the bus and then he walks to his sister's house, and I talk about him walking to the brownstones and how all the buildings look alike. And so these are the brownstones that all look alike, so you have to know which one you're going to so you don't go into the wrong house. I think when I first came here as a kid, that was one of the things that struck me about Park Slope, was how everything looked alike. And it's something that I also loved about it, because in Bushwick, like even on my old block, the houses are all re-sided, and so they're pink and yellow and green, and it's this really brightly colored block, but you know which house you're going to because we lived in the pink house, of course. I think when you look at the body of my work, you can definitely find parts of me in every story I've written. And I always say that although my books are not necessarily physically autobiographical, they're definitely emotionally autobiographical. So every emotion my characters have felt is an emotion I've had in my life. And there are definitely parts in Mason that are straight out of my life. I would say after Tupac and Dee Foster, I mean, moments on the stoop. We spend a lot of time on this stoop. So like moments on the stoop where you just talk junk, like I know that world really well. I know the world, unfortunately, of segregation. So The Other Side, when I started writing The Other Side, it was actually based on this neighborhood, because there was so, you know, you walk down 3rd Street and there are blocks in the neighborhood where people of color have never lived. And then you walk down St. John's and it's all people of color. You know, so there was this segregation going on that was really new and surprising to me. If my readers are going to walk away from my books with one thing, I think I would want that to be, I guess, tolerance. I mean, I think, you know, so much of my writing is about us all being people here, and what does that mean, and how do we accept that, and how do we move on from that. And I think by the end of so many of my stories, what young people are discovering is tolerance and intolerance, and beginning to ask themselves the question of, who am I? Where do I fall in this spectrum? And so I think if they can come away more tolerant, more open, more thoughtful about the world and their impact on the world and their impact on a greater good, then I think I've done my work.